Hello future tech leaders, I am Sindhuja. Based on my own experience, I know that learning the right skills can shape our future. What if I say learning was as thrilled as the tech world itself? There we go. A cloud foundation, that's exactly what you will experience. From day one, you will be immersed in the interactive sessions and expert-led courses that covers most of the widely used technologies in the zone of data science to cloud computing, which brings more light to the life of a techie. I'm so excited to help you and unlock the true potential of a technology. Well, then why to wait? Let's see what it unfolds.
With the reason why whilst building this context of minimizing the efforts or minimizing things that we are doing, because I'm going to discuss about something called as application infrastructure. And as part of application infrastructure, what we have over here is Azure App Services. As part of Azure App Service, if you see the resources over here, Azure App Service is a wrapper on your underlying environment, which is taking care of highability, which is taking care of reliability, which is taking care of auto scale. In a simple sense, it is a web form of that server form right now. In that web server form, how many instances you want to create? What type of instances you want to create? Having loose coupling between your code and the deployment right. All those kind of best practices that one would want to have. All those things are predefined, pre-existing inside your app service. Correct. Now, once that app service is created, which means you have the basic infrastructure ready. On top of that infrastructure, now you go ahead and create a web application, host of the application, or you host API app, or you go ahead and host another member over here, which is a mobile back-end service. Right? You decide what you want to host or run on that app service plan. Now, while you are doing this, there is also a logical separation by using something called as deployment slots, where you can have a staging environment or a pre-prod and a prod environment. Whatever changes you want to do, and you can quickly swap between both these instances. You can swap to your previous instance immediately, right? Those things can be done by using deployment slots. Like I and Chinna was discussing about, and Gopi also contributed over there. The most important part that you'll see is what is the kind of environment you want to build. If you're looking at something like quick POC or you are trying to show agility, quick DevOps, a marketing website, a new university course launch that you are trying to do, right? Some of these things will be very, very quick, very, very effective by using these solutions. Correct. And that's why many organizations go for it. Now, once you have published it, once you have got it working. Correct. Now, if you have consistent set of users who are coming to your website, then you can decide whether you want to host it within a VM or you want to continue running it inside an app service. That is your choice. Just to quote another example. As part of my implementations, I have worked with number of pharma companies in Mumbai. And the major thing which I was doing there is, I'm not sure. I'm sure you are aware about each of these pharma companies. They have their own, medicine categories. Right? And for every medicine, they will have minimum of one page. They're looking at more of a static website. Right. Hosting of stat and again large set of images, their processing and all those information goes there. Right. We have been part of I and my team has been part of helping them host those solutions, work with them, and make sure they are able to deploy these solutions, right? Migrate from their on-premises servers to Azure web applications, right? Especially helping them with what will be the right tier for them within web applications. How much is the processing required for that? All those things we have been helping with them, right? These are the kind of websites, static or dynamic websites, that you can run on this environment using app services. Along with this, in terms of other processing that you'd want to use, that is logic apps, or you can make use of Azure functions where you don't want to even bother about the underlying app service plan. You'll say, I would want Microsoft to create this underlying environment. I will only pay for how many requests is being received from the customer. That's it. Right. That is what is your logic app and functions, where the payment model is based on number of executions, number of requests or hits that you have on that API. Let's proceed further. And let's take a look at configuration of app service over here. As far as app service is concerned, app service basically will help you to post respective resources, which I already mentioned about. In terms of programming languages that you see, you have large number of options available here, ranging from .NET Framework to .NET Core, Ruby, Node, PHP, Python, right? There I'm not from a Linux background. I would not know that. What is something specific that a Linux-based environment can do for Python or for PHP? But there are developers who would say that I have a PHP application or a Python application and I want to run it on Linux only. Go ahead, create a Linux-based environment. But when you are choosing a Linux-based environment, you will not have control in terms of which distribution of Linux will be used behind the scene. Whether it is CentOS or Zeus or Red Hat or Ubuntu, right? That decision will be taken care by Microsoft. That underlying platform will be taken care by Microsoft. Same thing holds true for Windows as well. The OS is Windows or Linux, but underlying, what is the kind of implementation, what is the kind of version that is being used, that will be taken care by Microsoft. If you look at the deployment of resources, right, where is the code over here? As far as the code is concerned, the code will be available on the GitHub repository, Azure, DevOps, or any other environment that one would want, right? That's how this is actually an older screenshot. The new mechanism has changed over here. When you are deploying these, it will be deployed onto a specific slot. If you look at your app service, when you are creating an app service, you'd have to specify what is the runtime stack that you would want, what is the OS that you would want, and you need to have a pre-existing app service plan, which will be the underlying infrastructure, right? Like I already mentioned, this will have your load balancer, this will have your machine, which is taken care by Microsoft. Let's take a look at a quick demo over here. While we were discussing about these resources, I have also got right. As far as this application is concerned, This application is running inside a container. You can go to the logs section. Within logs section, you can check for what is the current event which has happened. Any kind of security that you want to implement over here in terms of system assigned managed identity or user assigned managed identity, you can mention that over here. It's not a security risk any. There is no security risk over here. That's what I was mentioning about. Let's go to app services. Let's create an app service over here. Let's take up an existing resource group. What do you want to host over here? Docker container, Linux-based container or Windows-based container. You can mention that or you want to run or you want to host a code over here. While you're hosting a Docker container, in the next section you have to mention what is the source of that container. What is the source of that source image of that container? That is an Azure Container Registry, the same thing. How we did it in Azure Container Instances. Now, once you look at the sizes over here, these sizes are the ones which will help you determine what is the kind of machine that you want to create behind the scenes. Now, this decision has to be taken based on the processing requirement that you have. How many requests that you are receiving on day-to-day basis? Which features are required by the customer? Those things you can do over here. That is the same. Right? And you see, every tier over here mentions what type of machine is going to get created behind the scene. Right. And it can go up to 20 staging slots. It can go up to 20 instances over here. Depending upon which of these options suits your requirement better. You can select that tier. Let me go ahead and continue with the default one, which is standard S1. As far as deployment is concerned, let it be disabled. In terms of monitoring, if you want to enable app insights, you can do that. I would definitely want to enable this because the next topic which I have in sequence is monitoring. Right. If I want to show monitoring, I have to make sure this resource is over there. Let's go ahead. Click on Create. Now, while you are creating this, I can show you the deployment. It will create two set of resources, or it will create two resources over here. One resource that will create. One resource which is going to create. Oh, sorry, not two, three resources. One resource will create is your app service plan. Second resource that will create is your web application. And what is the third one? This is the third one here. Application Insights. There will be 3 resources which will get created. If you look at the components over here, so BFF1, it is Microsoft Web/Server Farm. Whereas Subash Web App, Microsoft Web/Sites. This is the core infrastructure. And on that infrastructure, we have the site being hosted. On top of that, I have Insight. This is the third member over here. There are 3 components which have got created. Once we are done with this, let's go to the resource here. This is the default content which has got posted over here. Now all this part. Also there for the previous certifications, that is a tutor for. Once it comes to architecting, as part of architecting, the major reason of why this is being mentioned is making people understand that there are 2 significant ways of doing these things. You can go for infrastructure model. Infrastructure-based solutions that we have been discussing from day one. Once you realize that things have been stabilized, there are certain scenarios where past services will make more sense. But you can use these options as well. This is what we are mentioning about. That is deployment slots. By default, you have a production slot. If you want to change this, add a slot over here. We can add a staging slot over here. Now, once it comes to deployment, you can have different set of deployment for different set of contents being deployed in staging and production as well. Right now, both these contents will be same. Right. Currently, if you see, both these contents are same. What if I want to change the value to the or content inside staging? How do I do that? If I have to change any content inside staging, where do I make that changes? If you are deploying it from GitHub environment or Azure repository, you can go to the source code and make changes over there. In your source code management, that's one option. Second option is you can go to App Service Editor. You by default have a development tool over here. It's not a full-fledged tool, but you can go and make some of the modifications or changes to your content from here. To your content. Right now the file that we are seeing is hosting start or HTML. This looks more cryptic. Let me go to quick start for quick start for quick start for quick start for staging slot. Right. As it is being saved. Can you see this? Quick start for staging slot. Right. As it is being saved. Depending upon whatever changes you want to do, you can make those changes directly over here. It's not a recommended practice. But if you have to make some changes and see if it is swapping correctly or not, if resources are working properly or not, those things you can verify over here. Now once you look at these resources in terms of pricing, what are we paying for? Are we paying for every web application that we deploy? Or are we paying for the app service plan? What is the payment model over here? Here what we are paying for is app service plan. You don't pay for websites because what Microsoft has to provision from the infrastructure perspective is app service plan. What is the size of the tier that you have? Whether you have taken premium tier, isolated tier, you pay for that tier. You don't pay for the number of web applications which are getting posted over here. Right? I think when you are trying to create, I think that's where I have seen some options. There is a free tier also. Very true. Along with this, another important feature that you can see over here, scale up, where you can specify what is the scaling option that you have. Like Chinda was mentioning earlier that there are certain times during the year. Say for example, minimum I want 1 machine. Max I want 5 machines. And by default, 2 machines. Whenever I am starting with. Right. Now how this movement from 1 to 5 will happen can be decided based on the metrics over here. Depending upon which metrics you are choosing and what is the values that you specify. Based on that, we will have our movement here. The value, the CPU consumption is more than 70% and remains consistent for next 10 minutes. Right, which means I should increase the machine count by. Right, this is a scale out condition. I can also have a reverse condition over here, which is if I have consumption less than 10%, decrease the count. Are you getting it? When you talk about cloud environment and you are looking at scaling over here, scale. This is how you can. Apart from this, if you see the next section over here, which is like we are mentioning about once in a year where people are applying for transcripts and they want it to be given immediately or a minimum amount of time. I can specify the dates. What is the start date? What is the end date for that? Are you getting it? I can specify start date, end date over here. This is a start date. This is the end date. Between this start date, end, everybody should be able to connect to the website, download the transcripts from there, right? And there should be minimum latency when these operations are happening. Keeping that period of time, I can have minimum of 3 instances, maximum of 8 instances. Default, for instance. Create more number of machines, because at that point in time, I would need more resources. Chin, is it make sense for you? In what we were discussing in the morning. In the morning, different workloads, different time zone, different areas of the week or a year, where you want to create more resources. Create rules for that, right? Similar to scale and scale up option we talked in the virtual machines. There you have something called as virtual machine scale set. In virtual machine scale set, you have this option. What we are talking about right now is auto scaling. This auto scaling is there as part of your virtual machine scale set. Same thing is available here as well. What you are actually doing is you are consistently monitoring how much is the consumption, how much is the resource coming, how many requests are coming in, and how do you work with it. You will set all these parameters and it will automatically does the job for you. First, what we will do is it will check. What is the day today? Today is Thursday, right? Is there any rule for Thursday? Let me go back to the default rule. What is the date today? Do I have a rule for that particular date? Let me apply this. Totally depends upon the date values that you have or the day value that is there. If it is being something is being mentioned on that, it will first execute that. If not, go back to the default. It's like a upside down switch case. Let's proceed further. This was a quick look in terms of how do you create an app service over here and what is the options while you are creating an app service plan. If you look at the next section over here, that is app service, web app for containers. Right. What are the options available here? Let's see. I already mentioned earlier. Once it comes to your containers, we said I can pull values or I can get these details from Docker Hub environment. That's one option, which is a registry of all the images. Along with this, you can also pick values from container registry. Anybody who has worked with Docker Hub earlier? Goopy Goop? You all being developers. While I was working with Kubernetes, I did some Docker work. If you look at Docker Hub, I was thinking like when we have a Kubernetes and the key in the nodes, in the parts inside, why I did not understand, like why we need Dockers again. When we have this infrastructure, this high picture, because I'm not a developer. Can you repeat that question? When we have Kubernetes, right? When it is master, you have nodes and nodes. You have a parts and again inside, you have a single container where you add to the Docker. I was not able to understand. Probably developers may know better why we do it again when we have this infrastructure, this high picture. Very true. Did you now get the answer or you still don't have that answer? Right now I get it. If you look at, once you look at Docker Hub basically is a place where all the images have been registered and saved over there. When you're looking at container registry, the challenge which can happen with Docker Hub is anybody can go ahead and download it. Anybody can go ahead and download the images or do a Docker pull. Unless you have a private registry, which is a paid service. Correct? Unless you have a paid registry, or if you are going for a free registry, then anybody can do a Docker pull. As far as Docker push is concerned, only you can do Docker push. Who is the owner of that Docker Hub environment? Now, once it comes to container registry is a private image registry within Azure environment. Rather than working with two set of products or two vendors, one for storing the images, one for hosting and running the images, because Docker Hub can't run the images. Docker Hub can only store the images, run the images instance. It can't help you with containers. These containers have to run in some compute environment, some place where you have compute being provisioned and you can create containers over there. These containers will be created within your Azure environment. Rather than pulling it from Docker Hub, you can create a private registry within Azure itself by using Azure AC or Azure Container Registry. And through this registry, I can get my Docker file. I can create my resources over here. And using these resources, I can create as many number of containers as I want. Once I have the image created using ACI or using Azure Functions or using my web app for containers, there are number of options which can help me pull image from the container registry and help me create instances or help me create containers within my existing compute options. Both these things are at a single place. In terms of high availability, reliability, all those things is taken care by Microsoft. And Azure promises all those aspects that these are the facilities or advantages that I will give you, depending upon whether you go for standard tier or you go for a premium tier. There again, it is available as a PaaS service and you have respective tiers over here. Let's take a look at this once again. Let me go to all resources. I have my web application here, App Insights over here. Staging slot is also there. I have my app service plan. This is my app service plan. Let's go ahead and right. If you check for web app for containers, there's nothing over there. What we can do is simply create a web application here or an app service. While you are creating the app service, remember I showed you an option, right? Docker container. Now we already have this app service plan, which is using a Windows environment. Let's go for Windows. Let's go for Windows. As far as Docker instance is concerned, you can choose resources from ACR. You can choose resources from Docker Hub environment. Or we can take it from Quick Start options over here. You can see some time in the validation itself. Just give me a moment. What this will do is, this will create an app service plan. Within that app service plan, it will have an underlying environment which is with Docker, which do with Docker support. It will download the Docker environment. Configure the complete environment for publishing and running containers. All those things it will be automatically taking care. Take up a virtual simple Ubuntu virtual machine or a Windows VM and install Docker Desktop for Windows. Or try installing Docker on the Ubuntu machine. That will help you all to understand the steps over here. What is required for trading these resources? If you look at your now, this will be the difference between the previous web app that we had created and this one. You have your containers, container options over here. To show you what is the steps happening, how the Docker pull is happening. Cherna, you will be able to recall this, right? Docker pull, Docker push. Everything is happening behind the scenes. You don't have to do all these things. All those things are happening behind the scene for you. Same application. But this time this application is running inside the container. Anyone, any questions still here? In terms of running a container, Linux container, Windows container, App service plan. We already discussed about this earlier. What is the significance of app service plan? Here if you see your app service plan, this will help you determine what is the underlying capacity that you want to create. That is, size of the VMs and number of VMs both. If you are looking for geographical replication, you will have to create more number of app service plans in each of those regions. When you say auto scale over here, or whatever I showed you, scale out, scale in, all these things are relevant only to that region. If I want to compare it with our previous discussions, it will be similar to your availability set and availability zones, which is relevant to only that region. If you want to go beyond region, or if you want to set up a high availability in two regions, that which means you have to have two app service plans, one in region 1 and second in region 2, right? That is something that we will have to create. And on each of these app service plans, then we have to go and deploy your applications. Now that part becomes easier for us. When you are using something like Azure DevOps, using Azure DevOps, you will be able to. Using Azure DevOps, it will be easier for you to create a CI/CD pipeline. And using CI/CD pipeline, you can push these contents onto each of these environments or each of these app service resource that you have created. If you look at the APIP service tiers that you have these are set of tiers which are available, and you can see if you look at the shared basic, standard, premium and isolated, depending upon. From day one, I have been mentioning about the number of questions that one needs to ask to the customers. Right. You will see the significance of it over here. If you see the number of features which are available, when you go to a customer site and you are saying we are solving all your problems using Azure App Service Plan or using web application, right? On it. The next question is how? Because the world has changed. A lot of customers today are tech savvy and they know what are the services available on Azure or AWS. What we will have to do now is we may have to go to the next level and we have to start mapping each of these. Mapping each of these areas over here. For this particular problem, what is the solution that we have? Right. And then it's not just on a service level. It has to go on the feature level. Right. You have to mention the features over here as well. Give me a moment. On the slide, not a lot of these things can be shown. That's why it is good to understand these things from the primary source where this information is coming from. If you will see over here, view full details of app service plans. Right. You can see the complete list of information. What are the SLAs for each of them? based how many number of instances you want. What is the auto scaling do you want? Do you want your is and combination over here? When you're building a solution, based on that you can specify detail or choose the respective feature over here. Once you have drilled down on what is the feature requirement, it will be easier for you to map to then the closest app service plan. This is what I showed you already. How do you do a scale in, scale out? The first app, this is what has got by default created, and I discussed about how do you create an app service plan. You can also create an app service plan separately. That's not a problem. And once that is being done, then you can configure your resources on top of it. In terms of your virtual networks, like I have been mentioning about, every time you do a integration over here within your Azure environment, if you have networking option, right, these are the options available. You can have virtual network integration. And through this virtual network integration, what I can do is, I can integrate with my Azure Virtual Network. And once I'm connected to this Azure Virtual Network, this Azure Virtual Network can have a gateway, API gateway. Through that, I can connect myself to on-premises environment. You decide how extensively you want to use these resources and what are the options for it. You decide how extensively you want to use these and what are the options for it. If you are configuring a virtual network, this is same as like we mentioned earlier in terms of VPC. You can specify what is the virtual network that you would want to connect to. What are the resources that you, and here that what we are saying is, now one more. There was the number of sessions which I did earlier, 3 years earlier, where people used to say that whenever you publish any of these services, these are publicly accessible. These are publicly accessible because they are having REST endpoints. HTTP, right? This is not true anymore. Even if it has HTTP endpoints, doesn't mean everybody can access it. You can make a intranet-based application. This was a very, very common question 3 years earlier. How do I create intranet-based application where people only from my organization should be able to access a website? Right, but it is not running in my on-premises environment. It is running on Azure. The hosting platform I want is Azure or the cloud. But as far as the access is concerned, only people within my organization should be able to access it. No external interface. Those things you can implement using VNet integration. Once it comes to networking, all the previous discussions that we had in terms of VNet peering, right, regional VNet peering, global VNet peering, all those things will be applicable over here. I don't want to mention all those things once again. Because all those aspects we already mentioned. I have also showed examples of private endpoints. If you'll want, my recommendation will be, please go through it once again. Go through the previous networking sessions. Because there is nothing which is changed over there. It's same set of resources. Then I showed you about management slots. How do you create a management slot? And I showed you a staging slot over there. Right. One thing which I did not show you is swapping between two slots. Let me show you that. Because by now, I have both these slots within my web. I have two deployment slots where I also changed the content inside staging. Let me go ahead and do a swap over here. What is the source? What is the target? Of course, for each of these deployment slots, there will be different set of members over here, right? For each deployment slot, there will be different set of settings over here. Configuration settings. Many times, you may want to have a different. For staging environment, different data. For testing environment, different data. Those things we can have over here. Let's do a swap here. Once it comes to swap, it does not actually copies the content from environment or one folder to second folder and likewise nothing. It just changes the DNS mapping. The earlier DNS which was mapping to production, we now start mapping to staging and vice versa. Right? It does a DNS swapping behind the scene and it allows the users to access the same content. Though there are lot of deployment options over here. What I generally do is my projects, I don't keep 2 or 3 staging slots anyway. Because I don't want to have large number of changes which is pending inside the environment. I keep these versions onto source code repository. Why would I want to deploy it over here? Once this is done, let me go to staging, and if you see the content of staging slot, that value has changed. If you see this, quick start with staging slot, now that would have moved. That value would have moved to the production environment. Everyone, if I go production environment over here, can you see this? Quick start for staging. Chin. Are you all clear with this? Any questions here? This was quick look in terms of what is web applications. How do you create these resources? How do you work with these members? And when you are working with web applications, there are plenty of other features that you can explore over here. In terms of deployment center, you can see, you can see, you can see. You can see, you can specify what is your source code repository. From where do you have to get that data? You can specify what is your code repository. Where do you have to get that data? There has been a recent change over here. What I am trying to do is I am trying to pull the code from my existing repository and provision that inside my environment over here. I am trying to do this. 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 And finally, do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel.